Hello, this is Holland Timmins, otherwise known as the Connoisseur, and today we'll be looking at the first installment of a new series called The Comics That Changed Comics. And we will be looking at the Carl Barks Library, which happens to be the most popular comics in the world. The Carl Barks Library was assembled in the 1980s over the course of 10 volumes. The Carl Barks Library consists of Donald Duck, Uncle Scrooge, Donald Duck Family, and Walt Disney's comics and stories. This is volume 10. Carl Barks is one of the most influential authors, the best-selling author of the 20th century, actually, and looking to be one of the best-selling authors of the 21st century. You might think these comics are for kids, which they are, but they're also for adults. Carl Barks invented many of the characters you see in DuckTales, including Uncle Scrooge, the Beagle Boys. He created Duckburg, the Money Bin, created the Junior Woodchucks. So a lot of the stuff you take for granted in DuckTales is actually in the Duck comics. And unlike DuckTales, the comics are actually a hell of a lot better than DuckTales. I like DuckTales, but the comics just blow it out of the water. So if you think you're going to get the same thing out of the show DuckTales as you are out of the comics, you are sorely mistaken. These comics inspired such filmmakers as Steven Spielberg and George Lucas to create the globe-trotting, treasure-seeking adventure format of Indiana Jones. And it also inspired other writers like John Lustig, William Van Horn, and Don Rosa to do their own comics. Don Rosa himself actually inspired the band member of Nightwish, Tuomas Holopainen, to create a whole CD based off his work, The Life and Times of Scrooge. And, yeah. So there's, as you can see, there is a lot of comics. And I find that I like the Donald Duck Adventures and Uncle Scrooge Adventures a lot. But Walt Disney's comics and stories, well, Donald Duck Adventures and Uncle Scrooge Adventures are very much like Indiana Jones Adventures. Walt Disney's comics and stories show the adventures of suburban life, which is fine, But in case you're wondering, if you want to get this set, prepare to shell out several $100s per volume, and there's 10 volumes. I myself am currently still reading the 10th volume, but having read most of the Carl Barks Library, it's some of the best comics I've ever read. But if you are interested in reading the comics, there is the Walt Disney Carl Barks Library being released by Fantagraphics Books, and as you can see, well, let's just see the differences, okay? So you can see this is volume 1 of this is book 1 of volume 10. You have these Carl Barks paintings, pictures of Carl Barks. Right there is Carl Barks. Table of contents. And there are several essays about Barks through each book of each volume. So there are well over more than 30 essays. Way more than 30 essays. And yeah, as you can see, the comics themselves are in black and white. Nothing wrong with that. You actually get a good idea of the artwork. But if you go to the new releases, which are in a more sizable format, as you can see, is a table of contents, and the stories are actually in color. As you can see here, Christmas on Bear Mountain is the first appearance of Scrooge McDuck. And, yeah, so there are several more stories in this volume, and there are multiple volumes of this new release of the Carl Barks Library, and I would totally recommend that anybody interested in good comics to check out the Carl Barks Library. I know there's a lot of YouTube channels talking about how comics suck nowadays, but as you can see, this re-release of the most popular comics in the world, comics are still being released that are quite good, and yeah, Carl Barks is among the best. In fact, in the inaugural list of inductees into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame, Carl Barks was among the first three. There was Will Eisner, Jack Kirby, and Carl Barks, which shows you how big Carl Barks actually is, that he was one of the three initial inductees among Will Eisner and Jack Kirby. So, I will get to Will Eisner next time. But as you can see, this is a very good collection. And again, my sole regret is that I never got to meet Carl Barks. I've got to meet a lot of people, which I feel very lucky about, but I never got to meet Carl Barks. Here's the thing, he died in the year 2000, and I found out through a small blurb on a news website, just one small blurb, but overseas it was international news that Carl Barks had died. I don't know how people felt internationally when he died, but me, I was devastated. I'm a huge fan of Carl Barks. He is my favorite author of all time. And, yeah. Carl Barks, one of the most brilliant cartoonists of the 20th century, entertained millions around the world with his timeless tales of Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge, Walt Disney's Donald Duck. Christmas on Bear Mountain continues. Fantagraphics' acclaimed color series that exquisitely represents all of Barks' classic duck stories to a new generation. So yeah, if you're a fan of DuckTales, if you want to read good comics, if you want to get your kids into comics, if you want to get into comics, you can't go wrong with Carl Barks. You really can't. Okay. Well, that is my review of the Carl Barks Library. This is the Connoisseur signing off. And yeah, if you can, check it out.